The history behind Stanley Kubrick's big screen adaptation of Stephen King's classic novel The Shining is a fascinating one to say the least. Before it went on to be hailed by many as arguably the greatest horror movie of all time, not to mention the most parodied, The Shining faced a lot of unfortunate setbacks, from the abusive behavior that occurred on set to the mixed reception during its initial theatrical run, the most critical of the bunch being King himself, who felt the movie deviated far too much from the original source. In fact, he hated this movie so much that he wound up writing a follow-up book many years later, almost out of spite, called Dr. Sleep, which apparently featured a great number of things that would make it impossible for any filmmaker to translate to the big screen.
I just wanted someone to do Stephen King right.
This is where writer-director Mike Flanagan comes into play, whose discreet reputation of saving the horror genre continues to grow more and more, with such films as Hush, Oculus, Ouija Origin of Evil, and the Netflix TV series that, personally, I would consider as the best horror movie of the decade, The Haunting of Hill House. Seriously, that show is so good that I'm actually considering putting it on my best of 2018 list, which is still coming soon, by the way. Flanagan also caught the attention of King with his brilliant adaptation of Gerald's Game, which prompted him of getting the job that apparently no one in Hollywood was brave enough to accept, of tackling the Dr. Sleep movie for Warner Brothers. If that weren't daunting enough, Flanagan's take would not only tie directly with both of King's books, but the Kubrick film he despised for so long. So did he succeed in his goal of reconciling both worlds of Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick? Let's find out. The news story follows the kid with the supernatural gift referred to as The Shining, Danny Torrance, played as an adult by Ewan McGregor.
Hello there.
Whose childhood trauma of almost getting literally axed by his crazed father and constantly being visited upon by life-threatening ghosts has driven him to the bottle on several occasions. Eventually, he does decide to take the high ground and sober up, which ultimately lands him a job working at a hospice, where he puts his shining skills to good use in helping dying patients pass on in a peaceful manner. He also becomes psychic pen pals with another individual afflicted with the Shining, a young girl named Abra, played by Kylie Curran, who becomes a witness to a pretty brutal murder by, get this, a cult of immortal vapors known as the True Knot, who basically feast off the steam-like essence of people who have the Shining in order to sustain their unnatural long lives. Abra then becomes a target of interest in the eyes of this cult, especially its main leader, Rose the Hat, played by Rebecca Ferguson, leaving Danny no other choice but to step in and protect this girl at all costs, even if it means facing his own inner demons once more. Now, I can't speak for those who were very vocal on whether or not there should have been a Shining sequel in the first place, but if you consider yourself a longtime fan of either Stanley Kubrick's film or Stephen King's classic novels, I would say there's a pretty good chance you might come out of this one feeling pleasantly surprised. Hell, you might like it even if you've never gotten around to reading the books or seeing the original movie. Personally, I really loved it. Unlike another Stephen King outing from earlier this year that ran just a bit too long for its own good, this movie utilizes the best of its 2.5-hour running time to not only flesh out the story, but expand upon what came prior, build tension and suspense, and provide plenty of room for the characters to breathe, all without having to resort to using lame, cheap jump scares every 5 minutes. It certainly helps when you have a talented filmmaker and an equally talented cast and crew on board who know exactly what they're doing and how to do it properly. Ewan McGregor and Rebecca Ferguson each deliver fantastic performances, with one playing a man who seems more frightened of falling off the wagon again than going up against supernatural entities, and the other playing, honestly, one of the most memorable and intimidating Stephen King villains that isn't a psychotic killer clown from outer space. But if there was anyone who was more deserving of the MVP award, it would be the relatively new child performer Kylie Curran. I thought she did a phenomenal job playing this young girl, whose powers not only outshine everyone else, they wind up becoming one of the biggest showcases of the entire movie, which was another aspect I really dug about this flick. Like, as much as I love Kubrick's The Shining, they don't really do a whole lot with the actual Shining, you know, outside of making weird voices and spelling words backwards. Here, they finally get to explore more about this mysterious superpower in a way that feels very much like its own thing, as well as a natural progression of what came before. In a way, it kind of plays out like a grounded superhero film under the guise of a supernatural horror thriller, or just a better version of these films right here. The only thing that might throw some people off are the various connections to the original movie, particularly the new actors they brought in, which I will not name, to fill in a few key roles. At first, it did come across as a bit strange and even made me do a double take a few times, but the longer the movie played out, the more I understood their purpose in the film, which goes a little above and beyond than just being your basic bit of fan service. It's a shame this movie didn't do so well at the box office, because I actually wouldn't mind seeing a continuation of this down the line, despite it ending on a pretty definitive high note, which is more than I could say for a lot of Stephen King adaptations out there. The cinematography is breathtaking, the performances, as I've said numerous times, were superb, the writing is very strong, the themes of overcoming addictions and sins of the past I found to be very impactful, and the Shining sequences are epic as hell and totally worth the price of admission. It's one of the few decades in the making sequels that I can think of that fully enriches the legacy of its predecessor rather than take a huge dump on it, which is why I'm going to give Dr. Sleep a very high 9 out of 10. Now, before we head out, let's go for another round of shortcut reviews. For those unfamiliar, this is a segment I made up for the show where I quickly go over films I missed or didn't have enough time to review in long form. Since tonight's review was Dr. Sleep, we're going to keep in line with the theme and look over 7 more films that are in some ways franchise related. First one up is the other big screen Stephen King release, It Chapter 2, which happens to be the first of 2 killer clown movies on here that split folks down the middle. In this case, it was the egregiously long running time, the unnecessarily cruel opening sequence, the tonal inconsistencies between comedy and drama, and did I already mention this movie was way too long? But aside from it being one long fan edit waiting to happen, I still had a good time with this supposed final outing of this very strange and goofy duology. If anything, it sure beats the hell out of the 90s miniseries. Moving on to the other killer clown movie that drove people completely batshit for no particular reason, Joker. Outside of it being the year's most overhyped movie, I thought this was a well-crafted character study of one man's journey into his own unmaking that just so happens to take place in the same universe as this guy. It's certainly not a film without its flaws. Hell, I doubt it'll wind up on my top 10 by the end of the year, but either way, there's no denying how much of an insane impression this movie made over the past couple of months. Plus, I'm pretty certain Joaquin Phoenix has next year's Best Actor Oscar in the bag just for that laugh alone. Next up, we have El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. Netflix's surprise follow-up feature to, and let's be honest here, the greatest American television show of all time.
You're goddamn right.
While some have argued against the idea of continuing something that ended on such a pitch-perfect note, unlike some other shows out there, I actually didn't mind having an extra bit of closure for certain characters I haven't seen in 6 years, even if most of them look a bit too old to be playing these parts. As a standalone film, this might come across as a little too frustratingly dense for those uninitiated into the world of Breaking Bad, but for those who did go the full measure and binge through every single episode of the series, probably more times than they could say, "Yeah, bitch!" This is the freshly made dessert that you most certainly want to have after an already delectable 5-course meal. Let's speed things up with these next 3 sequels, which are Zombieland Double Tap, Terminator Dark Fate, and Maleficent Mistress of Evil. Similar to how I felt about El Camino, my enjoyment for the second Zombieland movie mostly stemmed from seeing the original cast return after such a ridiculously long hiatus. True, it doesn't offer up anything new we haven't already seen in the zombie genre over the past couple of years, but I still had a fun time overall. However, the same cannot be said for the other 2 films, which either tarnished their own legacy in favor of recycling a 35-year-old plotline that people are sick to death of seeing, or continue to make a complete mockery over Disney's most beloved animated characters. Here's hoping their minuscule box office returns made Hollywood execs finally realize that nobody wants to see any more Terminator sequels or any more live-action Maleficent spin-offs where she still doesn't turn into a damn dragon.
How do you f*** that up?
Speaking of Disney, our last movie we're going to look at is the studio's most recent blockbuster success, Frozen 2, the movie that many had simultaneously anticipated and dreaded since the original premiered back in 2013. The sequel certainly doubles down on both the animation and music departments. My god, does this movie look stunning. The story, on the other hand, I think could have used a bit more retooling, especially to give characters like Anna, Kristoff, and a few of the newer characters something better to do than just be constant nags, silent extras, or living conduits for run-of-the-mill cliches. But the stuff that did work, I thought really worked. If anything, that Panic at the Disco cover, Into the Unknown, is going to be stuck in my head for a very long time. And that was my review for Dr. Sleep and my 4th volume of Shortcut Reviews. What did you guys think of the movies I reviewed tonight? Feel free to let me know in the comments section down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to keep up with more movie reviews in the near future. That and clicking that little bell icon down there will be helpful as well. With that said, our show is now concluded. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I am the host, and I will see you next time on another Midnight Movie Madness.